My name is Ian Leftcourt. I'm a planner with Long Range Planning. I work with Becky on this comprehensive plan Redmond 2050 update, and I handle a lot of the housing related items, whether that's this element and the policies that we'll be discussing tonight, the Housing Action Plan, which was adopted earlier this year, or various regulations and codes. We work together as a team in long range planning to bring forward the best products we can to the community, and we're really grateful for everyone taking the time out of their evening to engage with us about this really important document.
Great, so let's go ahead and get started. And if you want to jump to the next slide. And your presentation bar is across the top again. Oh, good, it disappeared. All right. So this evening, we're going to do just a really quick overview of what we're doing with Redmond 2050. If you've been a part of this conversation before, just bear with us as we just cover that for folks who haven't joined us. I'm going to do the same thing, just really quickly touching on some of the major themes for this project. And then we're going to dive in to the policy options and alternatives that we want to discuss with you tonight. The focus of this workshop is housing policy options and alternatives. Last week we covered transportation and economic vitality. If you didn't have a chance to join us, I'm going to be trying to put a recording of those meetings up, so we encourage you to participate in that as well. We also have an online questionnaire that we would encourage you to participate in. So let's move forward and get started. We are using Mentimeter this evening. We would encourage you to go online to menti.com and use this code. I'm also going to put a quick link into the chat so you can just jump right in and if you'd prefer, if that's easier, just to click that link. If you could just really quickly let us know how your relationship was with Redmond. If you live here, work here, you can feel free to select more than one. We have some responses from our noon event in here already, so we'll just go ahead and combine everybody all together. And if you have any issues with Menti, just please mention it in chat and we'll try to troubleshoot for you. Okay. So great. I love to see business owners here tonight. Thank you. Great. All right. That looks like it's working so far for everybody. Let's just continue. So for Redmond 2050, we just want to show you where we are in the context of planning law in Washington State. We're starting at the very top. You see that we are a growth management state in Washington. That means all of the planning laws start at the state level and then we go down from there. So underneath the state is the regional planning in our area. That is Puget Sound Regional Council. They cover our county and a couple of others. And then underneath that, King County has planning policies. King County has to comply with the regional and the state. So everybody has to comply with everything that comes before them. And so that means as we come to our comprehensive plan and our planning policies for our community, we have to comply with King County's policies, our regional planning policies, and the state policies as well. But everything that comes underneath us has to comply with us. So that means all of our zoning and development regulations, our functional plans, that's our water and sewer, our police and fire, all of those things that actually are the on-the-ground implementation of our policies and actions, our neighborhood plans, and then all of our CIP projects for our capital improvements, so our roadway projects, all of the policies that regulate our impact fees and that type of thing. All of those policies, codes, plans, all of those have to be in compliance with the Redmond's comprehensive plan because this is where we adopt the community's vision, goals, objectives, policies, and standards that guide our day-to-day decisions that are adopted in those other documents. So that's just for context really quickly. We are updating the comprehensive plan. We are adopting the vision for our community. So before we dive into the topic, we would love to know how you heard about this workshop. This is just really helpful information for us to know which outreach methods are working really well for us and what we might need to do a little differently. So if you can just let us know how you heard about tonight, and we'll just jump through this really quickly and get to the meat of the topic. So for Redmond 2050, the update of the community's vision, we have adopted three major themes: equity and inclusion, sustainability, and resiliency. All three of these themes are guiding every update that we're doing, everything that we're reviewing. So, all of our existing policies, everything that we're proposing and moving forward are going to be evaluated against these things. We've adopted working definitions. We've created thematic lenses, which are review checklists for us to go by, and then everything that we're doing as this process moves forward is going to be evaluated against these themes. So, for instance, if we have two policy options and alternatives that we're looking at, one advances these themes and one doesn't, we're not going to move forward the one that doesn't. It's going to be dropped from consideration. We're going to be moving forward the ones that do. And then for existing policies, if there's some issues with how those policies interact with these themes, we're going to be updating those or adding new policies to address moving forward these themes. So that's just for context. Everything that you'll hear tonight has gone through this preliminary review process against these themes. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ian Lefcourt again tonight to go through the housing policy options and alternatives.
Thank you, Becky. That was a fantastic context. The staff is bringing forward tonight policy options and alternatives. It's important to recognize that policies are really the direction that the comprehensive plan sets out. So as we recall from that diagram that Becky presented earlier, the comprehensive plan sets the direction for functional plans, codes, regulations, and so forth, which means all of those underlying documents must comply with the policies that are established in the comprehensive plan. Policies are iterative. They've been built up from the previous comprehensive plan, from input of both leadership and our community members. And there's various processes we're using to update these policies. So for example, some of the policies are just outdated. That could be an example of a policy referring to a project that's been completed, or it could refer to some form of law or regional plan that no longer is relevant. So all of those outdated ones, we're just moving through. Regional and county requirements is a big one. We must include the policies that are required by those higher jurisdictions. So taken as a sum, on that diagram on the right, we see all of these policy considerations. However, staff is bringing forward to you, the community, policy options and alternatives where there is a tension, or if different strategies produce different outcomes. We really want to hone in on those where we need to get some guidance from our community because they're mutually exclusive policies. And ultimately, the question we're asking y'all tonight is which options and alternatives are best for Redmond? And we're hoping to hear not only your choices, but a little bit of your reasoning as well. So when we hop to the housing policy as option alternatives, the first question is, how should Redmond increase housing choices? Housing choices come in a lot of ways. Here we're discussing typologies, or the type of buildings. So that could include your classic detached single-family home. That could include townhomes, duplexes, all these typologies. And many of them are required by those higher jurisdictions. So we're updating across our various planning documents to integrate those typologies. This question in particular relates to how these various building typologies are managed in our neighborhoods. The first option is to remove existing neighborhood-specific restrictions that hinder a wider variety of housing types in our single-family zones. For example, there is a current comprehensive plan policy in our neighborhoods element, which states that in Education Hill, 80% of the dwelling units must be detached single-family homes. In addition, there are minimum distances that are required between various alternative housing typologies. So you have to be at least 500 feet between each duplex. Taken as a whole, this policy limits the potential amount of various multiplexes or alternative housing choices that are available. So this option says we want to remove those neighborhood-specific restrictions and allow these housing typologies to be spread across all of Redmond. On the other hand, we have option B, which is that we will maintain existing neighborhood-specific restrictions that hinder a wide variety of housing types. So it's either option, you're going to get some of these new housing typologies. However, with option A, you will get more than in option B.
So while you're doing the Mentimeter, we would love for you to unmute and share some of your reasoning and your thought processes behind your choice that you're making through the Mentimeter. Thank you. Anyone have any comment or thought they'd love to share?
You know, I haven't had a chance to really think through a lot of this. My name is Lisa Atwell, but I know that things need to change, and I think density is definitely a way to go. So I think it can be hard to change some of the ideas that we've had about our neighborhoods. And I think there's probably some concerns about different types of housing coming in, but I think it does make sense.
Great, thank you for your comment. Looks like David, you have your hand up.
Yes, I do. I voted to keep the existing neighborhood-specific restrictions based on the example that Ian gave about how the neighborhood restrictions are on Education Hill. I'm not aware that the light rail is going to be coming within a quarter mile or so of anywhere on Education Hill. And so I guess I have to wonder then why should a bunch of multifamily housing go up on Education Hill when that should really be concentrated in the transit-oriented development along the light rail close to the stations. So I'm voting for B, to keep the existing neighborhood-specific restrictions so that possibly that will redirect the highly the densely populated areas down near the transit stations.
Ian, it might be helpful to reiterate some of the housing types that we're thinking of to clarify the quote unquote density of the particular pieces that will be impacted.
Great minds think alike. I was thinking the same thing. So thank you for that comment. I want to be clear, there will not be big multifamily projects going into Education Hill in either of these options. These neighborhood-specific restrictions are more focused on things like duplexes, triplexes, ADUs, cottage housing. So a little bit more dense, but certainly not like those larger apartment complexes that are going in downtown.
Okay. Well, I've already cast my vote. I don't think that I can unvote.
If you could, would that change which option you support?
Now that you've explained it that way, I suppose that a lot of people on Education Hill would like to have the ADUs. so that they could house their mother-in-law and that sort of situation, right?
Or an adult child, or yeah,
Or
some
lots of
other,
adult children.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So now, but would people be using this possibly to build like a rental unit on their property, or something like that, that they would be trying to, I don't know, get people they don't know to come and live there?
That is beyond the scope of this policy itself, but
Yeah.
as is, they would, any of these housing typologies would follow the same general regulations as applies to, say, a single family home.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay. You mentioned that if I could change my vote, does that mean there's a way to change it?
We might explore that on the back end.
Okay.
Mm.
Well, so for now, I have voted B.
Is there any other thoughts or comments before we move on? Okay.
This second discussion is how should Redmond balance green building and affordability? And there's a few pieces up top I really want to emphasize. The first is Redmond's leadership, Redmond's community, and Redmond's staff all value both of these. Wherever possible, the city of Redmond is going to pursue both a greener built environment and a more affordable housing stock. So this policy option and alternative prompt is only about in those cases where it really is a conflict and we just need to know which way to go. So for most situations, we're going to pursue both as best we can. And this just helps provide a little bit of input on which one tips the scale. So the first option is to prioritize green building incentives and requirements. So we see the solar panels, rain catchers, things of that nature. And then the opposite is to prioritize affordable housing incentives and requirements. And it's worth noting that, again, both of these will be pursued as best we can. And in fact, sometimes they are the same thing. Multifamily structures typically have a smaller environmental impact per dwelling unit than a detached single-family home, and they tend to be less expensive. All right, look at those votes coming in. Becky, do we have anyone with a hand raised in the audience?
David, your hand is still up. Is it from the previous or is it a new question or comment?
It is from the previous, but I do have a new comment.
Go for it.
Okay. So I'll just repeat what I said at noon, that if a dwelling unit has a green building built into it, then presumably it would be more energy efficient and would probably reduce the cost of utilities for a person living there, making it more affordable. So, and I believe that Ian also mentioned that some of the green building techniques are actually, I think you mentioned 5% cheaper than non-green. So it would be possible, I think, to build a housing unit that is both affordable and green. So I'm going with green.
Thank you for that input. And absolutely, the pricing of green buildings has a pretty big spectrum when we look at different case studies. And so it can actually be a little bit cheaper. We've seen, about 0.5% cheaper than conventional buildings to be a little bit more expensive. It's a real case by case situation because technologies are always changing, sites are so different and have impacts. But it is absolutely possible in at least some situations for green buildings to be less expensive to construct than conventional buildings. And as David alluded to, we can lower the cost of utilities in a more energy efficient building. And utilities are something the city looks at in terms of the total cost of living. So that when the city is exploring affordable housing, the city takes a more holistic approach than just rent. It looks at utilities, transits, utilities, the whole kit and caboodle.
Are there any other comments, questions, thoughts on this topic before we move on? We'd love to hear what you're thinking about.
But of course, no pressure if not.
Okay,
Well, in
great.
that case, we'll open it up to any questions about housing or the comp plan, or really, if you've ever wanted to ask a planner, Becky and I are here for you.
Do you have any thoughts, concerns, questions about housing policy? It doesn't necessarily have to be the ones that we brought up today as a question, but anything related to housing. Would be happy to discuss that this evening. Looks like David's hand just popped up real quick.
Here we
Go.
go. Unmute. Um, so I guess a lot of these builders, developers say, okay, green building, huh? Who's going to pay for it? So I wonder, will there be any sort of subsidies that a developer, a builder can receive if they do build green?
The city is always eager to collaborate with external jurisdictions and agencies to help get all the funding and incentives we can to get these projects underway. So that includes philanthropic efforts from, say, local corporations. That can include things like regional housing authorities, the federal government, and we are lucky that Washington State itself has some pretty robust, say, grant programs for green retrofits and affordable housing. So while the comprehensive plan won't really get into the specifics of, say, you know, city will pursue X grant, we're going to make sure woven through all the policies and all the elements, the comprehensive plan firmly directs the city of Redmond to look at all available resources to help realize the vision of our community.
Anything else? We had a really robust, fun conversation at noon, so we'd love to hear your thoughts and comments, questions, anything related to housing.
So,
Oh, go ahead.
no, go ahead, David.
Well, seems like every now and then we hear how the city council has a few members that are excited about green roofs. So, do you know then, is there any sort of encouragement for builders, developers to put green roofs on their buildings? Is anyone trying that yet in Redmond? I'm not particularly aware. Maybe over on the Microsoft campus. But are green roofs being constructed at all or regularly? I guess I'm not aware.
I think we'd have to ask our current planning folks. I'm not aware off the top of my head of anything. Are you, Ian?
I was th I was thinking the same thing. I can't recall any of the projects that have gone through tech that have green roofs.
Mhm.
It is something that we're looking at encouraging for sure.
Hmm.
And one of the things that excuse me, may end up doing is discussing whether we want to move that from an encouraging conversation into a incentivizing conversation. So that might come up during this particular update. And also, I know Jenny Liebeck is working on an update to a lot of green building standards and our green building code, and looking at updating some policies and programs. And so that might be a part of some of the things that she's working on right now as well.
Um, I'll just mention that although there appear to be uh, a lot, lots of benefits, which may outweigh the cons, but there are a few disadvantages, such as I think higher maintenance, and it simply is just a lot of weight on your roof, and
Hmm.
need a sturdier support for all that. And I don't think that it's intended for growing trees, more low low growing herbs and shrubs and such. Um, so it'll never replace a tree canopy, but I guess the thinking then is that at least you've got some some plants up there that are doing some photosynthesis.
Yeah, and I think in the overlay discussion, as we start to look at taller buildings, the green roofs might be more of an amenity type of feature too. So it might not necessarily be herbs and that type of thing, but it might actually incorporate potted trees or something along those lines to create an amenity space slash green roof. So there's definitely things that we're going to be talking about specifically in the context of taller buildings. Um, but let's get to Lisa. You had a comment you wanted to chime in on? Oh, you're muted if you. Oh,
Can I just ask a couple quick things?
yes, please go ahead.
So this is my first time listening in. So I think my initial reason for sort of searching this out may not be within your sort of sphere. So I had a leaflet that was passed out at my house that was talking about what they're calling the homeless hotel in Redmond, the Silver Cloud Inn that was purchased, and they're pretty, so apparently there's an organization that's pretty against that. And so I just wanted to know if that's anything you guys are involved in, or where I would go to put my support in.
We can record the support, but I think to get the most information and most influence, I would reach out to our human services team,
Okay.
and I am happy to get that email address and put that in the chat for you.
Oh, I really
Yeah.
appreciate that.
And our mayor's office is coordinating a lot of that too. I would just clarify really quickly a few just basic facts on that one. They purchased a hotel, um, King County purchased a hotel for permanent supportive housing. So it is slightly different than homeless shelter as a use. It's a long-term residential facility. But yeah, I would encourage, as Ian mentioned, reaching out to our housing team, since they know a lot more about that project than we do.
Okay. Yeah, I felt like this was fairly misleading and was kind of frustrated by it. And then you said there was a lot of discussion in the noon hour. I was wondering if you could just quickly summarize what some of the comments that you were getting, or what were some of the issues, just to get a broader perspective.
certainly. Let's see. We'll pull up our notes real quick as we go forward. All right. Okay, so some of the questions that were asked were, are we looking at annexing more land for affordable housing? So the answer to that would be the way that we're structured from a planning perspective in the state is we have an urban growth boundary for Redmond, and that boundary isn't expanding. So we're not looking to annex any land. So that may happen at some point in the future, but we're not the ones that control that boundary. That actually comes at the county level. So we may pursue that at some point in the future, but not at the moment. There's some on-street parking questions for neighborhood diversity. I don't know if Ian, if you want to pipe in on that one.
Absolutely. We had some questions about those typologies we discussed in the first question and the various impacts that could have on parking and traffic. And one of the biggest topics that's currently going on through the city, not just in Redmond 2050, but through many other departments as well, are parking standards, the parking minimums, the dimensions, where it should be located. As the city puts in more of those, for example, as Becky mentioned, those big overlake developments that are going to help bring in the growth that we're required to take as a city, these parking situations will become more fleshed out and brought through a public engagement process. At the time, we haven't really conducted a heavy parking analysis of those more exterior neighborhoods, but this is something to keep an eye on, and we're excited to dive into it.
Like some of the other questions and comments that came in were related on incentivizing retrofitting for existing buildings and cost benefits, upfront versus long term. If you want to chime in on those as well, Ian.
Yeah, I think the cost benefit analysis is something we discussed earlier with David about how you can really see a benefit long term with the reduced maintenance costs, but with some various smart technologies, it could actually be more for the operation of the building itself. Individual tenants in, say, a very energy efficient multifamily building would mainly just see the benefits. In terms of looking at the cost of benefit analysis itself, that's kind of challenging to do for a lot of the reasons we discussed. It's changing technologies site by site. So we'll try and do the best we can to bring that information out to the public. And then regarding the retrofitting, absolutely. As we discussed earlier with some of those incentives and external support, the Department of Commerce provides local jurisdictions with grants and other financial support to do green retrofits, in many cases for more affordable housing, whether that's a project or an individual's property. So those topics, they are important and they are being integrated into the comprehensive plan update.
I think just one more, I think that's worth sharing. There was several other, don't get me wrong, but one more that's worth sharing is there was some conversation about EV and electric vehicle readiness.
Oh, okay. Well, I appreciate you giving the update.
No problem. We're happy to share. Any other thoughts or comments or questions?
I see David's hand.
Yes, Ian, you mentioned something that reminded me I wanted to ask about the required or the growth requirements that the Growth Management Act has for Redmond. Are these requirements the same for all cities, or are they customized for the various cities? Because it seems like some cities are of the opinion that when they read that they are required to accommodate growth, that all that means is that they need to do zoning that would allow for a developer to come in, and they don't necessarily have to, encourage growth to take place in, for instance, the city of Kenmore. So they're happy with just rezoning a few lots, just in case there need some developers interested in building residential or industrial, whatever, commercial, but they aren't really, it seems like in Redmond, one Redmond seems to be on a constant search for developers to come to Redmond, whereas in Kenmore, they're sort of like acting like they don't want development unless someone asks. So I guess my question then is, has the county or one of the higher level governments involved decided how much growth then Redmond is supposed to accommodate?
Yes, I would love to tackle this question if you don't mind,
Oh,
Deanne.
yeah, please.
So really quickly, how it works in Washington State is, the Office of Financial Management sets up general parameters for how much they think the state's going to grow, and then they break it down into counties, and then they give that information out. In our area, we have a regional planning authority that gets those numbers first. And what they do is they decide how they're going to distribute their numbers, where they're going to pick their ranges based on localized information. So I'm going to share my screen really quickly and show you what happened at the regional level, and then I'll walk it down to how we got to Redmond's growth and what we've been assigned to take. Let me just pop on this. So again, at our area, we have the Puget Sound Regional Council. What they did is they said, okay, this is how much growth we expect to happen in our 4 counties. And then we have growth policies that state that certain growth should be focused in some areas and not in others, and not just spread out evenly. So what they've done is at the county level, they've assigned how much goes into each county, and then we have categorizations of communities. So Redmond happens to be a core city. And so we happen to be in a group where we are assigned a significant amount of growth, because we are not only a core city, but we are a core city in King County. So King County has been assigned almost 50% of our entire region's growth. And then the core cities have been assigned 40% of King County's growth. So then what happens at the next stage is we say, okay, King County core cities, you have to take this amount of growth. Who is it going to? And so the county then goes through and says, okay, let's talk and let's figure out who's going to go where, and what the numbers are going to be. And so for that process has been finalized. We do have our numbers. We know we are going to be required to accept 24,000 jobs and 20,000 housing units by 2044. So every community has been assigned a number that they have to accommodate. And then we, during our updates of our plans, have to decide, how much is that compared to what we have existing capacity. So for instance, we have existing capacity of about 17,000 housing units, and we've been assigned 20,000 housing units. So we have to figure out how we're going to fill the gap and where we're going to put those housing units. So we have to do some rezoning. We have to decide where that rezoning is going to be, how tall those buildings are going to be. Do we want them to be focused near our light rail stations? Do we want them to be spread out a little bit more to not have all the impact on one area? And that's a discussion that we're currently undertaking. We've had some preliminary discussions with the community over the last year, and then we're going to be having more over the next 15 months or so as we finalize those alternatives that where are we going to put our growth in the community. And every city is going to have to do that same process. They've been given a number, and then they have to decide how they're going to accommodate that number. So it is a process that is statewide. Everybody is assigned a number. and they have to figure out how they're going to accommodate that growth.
And the number you're referring to is number of people, is that correct?
Well, technically, it's coming out as number of jobs and number of housing units. And then
Oh,
what we do
okay.
in our area is we know we have an average of 2.6 something people per housing unit. And so then we calculate the population numbers that way. But the goals are housing units and jobs.
I see. Now, but I noticed that the population radio button was selected there on that, what you were
Oh,
showing just now, as
yeah.
opposed to the other one, which was employment.
Yeah, and in that, I can share that URL in the screen and you can go play with that.
Yeah, okay.
There you go. But yeah, what they've done is they've just done an average for the population. But when it's assigned to the cities, we're assigned a housing unit.
I see. Well, thank you for that quick explanation.
Yeah, that was really interesting. Becky, are those numbers that are like the 20,000, the 17,000 housing units, is that what we have total in Redmond now, or that's what?
No,
No.
what we have now is significantly more than that.
Okay.
That is our capacity for more. So
Okay.
on the ground zoning allows right now by right an additional 17,000 housing units. It's scattered all over the city. There's some up on Roadness Hill, some in Overlake, some in downtown, some in Marymore. It's really all over the place, right? So that just says we have vacant parcels and we have parcels that are ripe for redevelopment. So for instance, if you have a shed on a property that's worth $4,000, we're going to count that as ripe for redevelopment, in the pressures. So there's different areas and calculations that we do. We also set aside properties that won't get redeveloped. They don't go into those calculations, right? But our existing capacity then may not be in the right place, right? So we may not want to utilize a whole bunch of growth in a certain area. We may want to focus it in others. And so we take a look at that over the next year or so. We decide if we want to move some things around a little bit and increase capacity in other areas. But what that means though is by right today, somebody can come in for a project and proposal and build those units. And that's what we have. So what we have to do to meet our regional planning requirements and our state planning requirements is to fill the gap, right? So we have to make sure that we can accommodate the growth that we've been assigned somehow or some way. And it could be adding a lot of missing middle all over the place. It could be adding a couple of taller buildings in certain places, or it could be some combination in between, right? So that's the discussion that we're going to be having over the next 15 months or so is how are we going to accommodate that growth? Where are we going to accommodate the growth? What do we want it to look like? And that's the conversation we started last year.
Great. Very informative. Thank you.
You're welcome.
May I sort of follow up on that?
Sure.
Okay. So let's say that Redmond manages to accomplish the goal of accommodating their assigned growth. Then would there be more assigned growth to Redmond since Redmond achieved that goal of accommodating that growth? Here you go. You got some more now.
That is a great question. And actually, yes, every 8 years, the state goes through this process all over again. So the next periodic review, I mean, they're called periodic review cycles under the Growth Management Act, is the state pushes out a number and says, you're going to grow this bucket, figure out where it's going to go. So every 8 years, we're going to be assigned more growth. It's not going to stop. That's how our state is designed. So in another 8 years, we're going to be assigned another number. And we don't know what that number is going to be because we don't know what the growth is going to come out of the state at that time, right? So it's really going to be something that's based on the information that they have at that time as far as the amount of the numbers are going to be. So they may or may not be comparable to what we're assigned this time, but it will not stop. We will be assigned more growth every 8 years.
Okay. Until we reach what? The population density of India or China?
I mean, it's a good question the state's going to have to discuss after the long term. I mean, at some point we may have to adjust that urban growth boundary for Redmond, right? So that there may be a point where we need to expand a little bit out that we can't all expand in. There may be a point in time where we go even taller in Overlake, or there's lots of different ways that would have to just address that in the future. But that's one of the reasons why they do it every 8 years, is so that those adjustments can be made at small levels instead of big levels, if that makes sense, that we can start incrementally just kind of making adjustments.
Absolutely. And those growth projections are based on demographic trends, right? So
Mhm.
we're accommodating the growth that just is coming to Washington State.
Yeah.
If we were a state that was experiencing population loss, then we wouldn't be going through this, additional growth capacity.
And that is very true. Before I came to Redmond, I worked for Island County, and one of the OFM projection models showed the low end of growth was actually population loss. And so at the county level, we had to decide based on the information that we had about growth and development and the plans for the Navy and all of the things that we knew about in our community, where we wanted to be on that low end or high end or somewhere in the middle, and then develop the methodology and that put us at a point where we were comfortable saying this is what we think is logical to happen, and this is what we're going to plan for. And that happens every single review cycle. Every county, or in our case this region, has to do that same thing. They get that window of low, medium, and high from the state, and they have to decide, okay, where are we within this window, and in our area, what do we think is realistic? What do we see here? Tailoring it to each area instead of having a statewide blanket methodology, if that makes sense.
Well, obviously, I need to take a course in GMA.
I am always happy to talk about GMA. so, so any other questions, or we can let you go for the night, but we'd be happy to sit and chat definitely more about housing for sure, especially while Ian is here. Otherwise, Ian, if you want to pop up the dates of the next couple of workshops and just share your screen, we want to let you know about those
Mhm.
before you drop off. We've got a couple coming up.
Okay. Ian mentioned I might have the opportunity to change my vote on existing neighborhood specific restrictions.
Well, we can look behind the scenes and see if we can adjust that number for you.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah. I don't think that we can back up. I'm not sure. We're just exploring Mentimeter. We just started with it last week, so the technical capabilities of that we're still learning. So,
Got it.
okay. But the next couple of workshops that we have, I'm going to be leading some conversations about Overlake on September 2nd and September 16th. Those are going to be really exciting. Is how are we going to accommodate growth? A lot of our growth is going to be assigned to Overlake just because of some logistical challenges in the high water table in downtown and Marymore.
Mhm.
So we're going to be accommodating growth in Overlake one way or the other. Let's figure out how we're going to do it. On September 16th, we're going to be looking specifically at the overarching vision. And I really want to talk about and play with the idea of the international district for Overlake. And then on September 8th, we're really going deep dive into inclusive and universal design principles, which is going to be a lot of fun. So those are the next couple ones. We do have some out into October, and we're going to be scheduling more. So we encourage you to participate as much as you can. Lisa, you said you joined us for the first time tonight. If you are not already signed up for our email list, we encourage you to do that. We have a Redmond 2050 email. You can sign up on our website.
Yeah, that's where I ended up getting the email from.
Perfect.
So, yeah,
Great.
yeah.
Well, thank you guys for joining us tonight.
Thank you. All right.
Yeah, thanks.
Bye.
Bye, friends.
Have a great evening.